And as we go from country to country with the forum, we realize that at each stage, we have persons present in the forum who are novices to the whole internet governance space. I'm not quite sure exactly what we're talking about. Some people think it has something to do with government, and it does, but not in the way that they think, right? It is done the governance of the internet, and when I say governance, I mean the process of governing, the process of managing the whole internet operations, right? That is what we call internet governance, and it has various dimensions to it. It has a technical dimension, it has administrative dimensions, it has aspects related to international relations, aspects, and well, I will get into it in the presentation that I will make at this point. So if I could just get the initial presentation up, we'll be on our way. Oh yes, so here we are. So this presentation would take us through the ABCs, as it says. Introduce terminology and the organizations involved and things like that. Now, remember I said our purpose today generally is primarily educational, to bring everybody up to speed with a basic level of understanding of the topic and the issues. So we will depend on you once you've seen the presentation to come forward, ask questions and so on related to anything that you might not have understood. So I'll go through this, and hopefully at the end of it you would have generated some questions in your mind. You should have some notepads in front of you to take the notes while I go through quickly. Right, so we're going to cover fundamentals. Who are some of the actors or organizations involved in internet governance? Some acronyms, and you will find in information and communications technologies generally, and in the internet space in particular, acronyms is like a part of the language. So sane people will walk into a room and hear people talking in the internet space and really not understanding what language they're talking, because there's so many acronyms that come up. I'll introduce you to a few of them in this talk. Some general concepts. We'll talk about infrastructure, legal issues, socio-cultural development, policy, economics, and what are some of the Caribbean priorities. And I'll be talking about the various levels, and you should get an understanding of the complexity of issues involved with internet governance, governing the internet, which has basically pervaded every aspect of life, every industry that we have around the world. And of course it matters because we are talking about the internet. Everybody has their smartphone in their pocket. Every government office is computerized, and every business has a website. Some do commerce. There are security issues related to it. And so basically, because the internet has pervaded our lives so much, the management of this whole internet operation must be important. We are terribly dependent on the internet, and in the course of our forum over the next couple of days, especially, well, over these 3 days, we will be touching specific aspects, including also human aspects, behavioral aspects that would be quite thought-provoking. How are you doing? So what is it really? Is there a definition? And there is a definition that we have held on to, which was developed back in 2005 out of the work of the World Summit on the Information Society. And that summit commissioned a working group on internet governance to basically try to define that what it was they were talking about. That World Summit Information Society was a UN organized event in Geneva initially, and then it was finished Geneva initially in 2003 and finished in Tunis in 2005. And that working group included persons from all around the world, and I'm happy to say also from here in the Caribbean. We had a representative from Barbados and one from Trinidad and Tobago on that working group on internet governance. And in fact, one of those representatives is in the room here right now. So they've come up with a definition, and I will read it because it's important that to communicate the various dimensions, of the topic. I will read it if it returns. There you go. So internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles. So that's the first thing. It is addressing actions by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles. So that is what we call multi-stakeholder. It's not just a government thing or a private sector thing or a civil society thing. So what are they developing and applying? They are developing and applying shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. So in that one sentence, it's a little bit complicated to understand, but the essential points are that we have multiple actors working together at various levels, technical and otherwise, to make this internet develop and to order the use of the internet. Right? So when we talk about internet governance, again, it's not just government. Government is one stakeholder, but we are talking about the process of running the internet, of growing the internet, of using the internet, and all the norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that are associated with that. So that basically is the sense of what internet governance is. And the graphic next to it indicates all the levels on which this coordination of all these actors takes place. On the infrastructure level, telecommunications infrastructure level, at the technical standards level, and these technical standards relating specifically to the internet infrastructure, and at the content and applications level, which is where you find your search engines, your social media platforms, and all the various other applications that we use the internet for. Right? So at all these levels, you have this sort of coordination among all these actors. So that's the sense of what internet governance is. While the national anthem was being sung in Dutch, and I realized that our forum is being rendered in English, it's important for us to try to be as clear as possible in the communications, and it's important for us also to know that we are being understood. So we would also depend on you to raise questions as you might need to. Okay, so let me move on. I will get into more details about these levels and so on later on in the talk. So we talked about governments, private sector, and civil society. Over the years, since 2005, we've refined we've defined in more detail some of those stakeholders that are involved. And yes, we have government, private sector. In terms of civil society, though, we've kind of split out a few. There is the academic community in particular, that has been split out. Civil society would be your general users. The technical community would be the organizations that actually run the technical operations of the internet, the telecoms infrastructure, the internet level type of things. And some of the organizations are here: ISOC, ICANN, the regional registries that I'll explain soon, but I've mentioned LACNIC and ARIN. And basically some of the telecoms operators, internet service providers, and so on. And also, oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. And also the international organizations associated with that. So to do this international coordination at these levels, at the telecoms level, you have organizations like the ITU and even the CTU in the region here. But at other levels, we have organizations like the UN. ICANN is one that has international elements to it as well. And some of those internet organizations actually govern internet addresses over multiple countries. So they work internationally as well. So apart from the technical community, there are also other international organizations associated with it. I mentioned the language of acronyms. And this is some of the common ones that we run into. You've already seen us shorten internet governance to IG. Internet Governance Forum is the IGF. That's the global forum that the UN formed after its World Summit in the Information Society in 2005. The first IGF was held in 2006. But our Caribbean Internet Governance Forum was first held prior to the end of the WSIS. And we've been running since 2005. So we are even older than the global IGF. ICT, you would probably have heard about, Information and Communications Technology. The ITU is the International Telecommunication Union. And for those of us in the industry, you would have encountered the ITU, who is involved with technical standards development in the telecommunication space, and in recent years also in the more general ICT space. So they also work on some standards for the internet, but not really the core internet technical standards. That's done by another one of those acronyms, which is not on the screen right now, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is a part of this Internet Society. So ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, they are the organization that handles the internet addresses and domain names globally. We will be hearing more specifics about ICANN's operations from Mr. Albert Daniels after my talk is finished. And he'll be talking about how ICANN works their multi-stakeholder model to actually do their work. This Internet Assigned Numbers Authority is a part of ICANN, is a part of what ICANN does. And it was very much in the news up to, I would say, up to last year, when there was what was the word? It's not restructuring, transition. There was the transition of the functions within ICANN, and also a transition of the way ICANN was run as well. IPv4 and IPv6, these are the Internet Protocol addressing schemes. So in the telephone network, which you might be well familiar with, you have a telephone number. And that is, in technical speak, that is your address on the network. That is where we find you on the network. So my particular number on the telephone network is my address on the telephone network. If someone wants to call me, they dial my number. In other words, then they connect to my address and they find me. On the computer network that is called the internet, the addressing scheme, the numbers, similar to the telephone numbers, are called IP addresses. And there are two methods or schema for doing IP addressing. The older one is called IPv4, which is IP version 4. And the newer one is called IPv6, which is IP version 6. They both coexist on today's internet. And the numbers that are represented by the individual devices on the network, each device on the network needs a unique number. The numbers are assigned either according to the IPv4 or IPv6 scheme, and those numbers are ultimately controlled by ICANN, but ICANN has delegated regional internet registries. The ones that work in the Caribbean are ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers, and LACNIC, the Latin American Registry. For Suriname, LACNIC is the regional registry that handles IP numbers for Suriname. ISPs is Internet Service Providers, and IXPs are Internet Exchange Points. An Internet Exchange Point is a convenient switching point whereby you can more efficiently manage the routing of internet traffic. In the early days of the internet, the way countries like Trinidad and Tobago, and I guess Suriname as well, connected to the internet is that they would get an international link to a major provider, probably in North America, maybe connecting to Miami or something of the sort. So all traffic that accessed the internet had to go to Miami. And if, for example, it was information relating to something back in Suriname, the information would go to Miami and come back to Suriname for the communication to take place. If there were an internet exchange point in Suriname, such communications would not necessarily need to be routed all the way to Miami, and it could stay within Suriname and save the international capacity that would have otherwise been used, and basically run cheaper and more cost effectively. So pushing internet exchange points has been one of the activities that the CTU has done via the CIGF over the years, and with some success. Tomorrow, please God, when I talk about some of the background and history to the CIGF, you will see some of the results of that. Multiple other acronyms. This is what, as I said, you might be getting tired already, but this is just a primer as far as the internet world is concerned. Well, we are the CTU. ITU reappears again. And for ARIN and LACNIC, I mentioned the two registries that operate here in the Caribbean. ARIN handles roughly most of the English-speaking Caribbean, except for Trinidad and Tobago. Most of the English-speaking islands of the Caribbean, I should say. LACNIC handles most of the non-English-speaking. They also handle the mainland Caribbean territories like Guyana, Suriname, Belize. The Caribbean Network Operators Group is a group of operators in the Caribbean who get together and share technical information and expertise for the benefit of all around the Caribbean. And they had their last meeting in April in Miami, just last month in Miami. Packet Clearinghouse is an organization, a non-profit organization that works around the world to develop those internet exchange points that I had talked about. And they've worked for a long time, actually, faithfully with the CTU to push and develop internet exchange points around the Caribbean. The Number Resource Organization is an organization of those regional internet registries, LACNIC, ARIN, and others from around the world, like APNIC, RIPE, and AFRINIC, which is the African Network Registry, who get together to basically organize among themselves all those registries, their own business, and relate back to all the various global fora. I mentioned CaribNOG, Caribbean Network Operators Group. You'll also hear people talk about NOGs generally, meaning network operating groups or operators groups. The WSIS I've already mentioned, the World Summit on the Information Society, which the UN ran in 2003-2005, which basically got internet governance started. And well, this was a specific conference of the ITU related to international telecommunications that was last held in 2012, I believe it was. I think this is the last one. The domain name system, the DNS. In the internet, we use internet numbers like telephone numbers, but the internet numbers are a lot more complicated and long than telephone numbers. So they're not convenient for humans to use and remember. So on the internet, an approach was taken whereby, okay, we will use names. And the names would be quite familiar to you, things like facebook.com or google.com or ctu.int and so on. So that's the domain name system, or the DNS, as you will hear a lot more about that, and the management of this DNS when Albert speaks. DNSSEC is a particular extension of the DNS, which enables it to operate in a more secure fashion, especially in these days of cybersecurity. You would want to make sure that your registries or your operations are running DNSSEC. The top level domains, or TLDs, that's the .coms and .org and .sr for Suriname and so on. Like the one next door to it, which is what? The country code top level domain. So you have TLDs, which might be generic, like this, GTLDs, the .coms and .orgs, or country code related, .sr, .tt, and .lc, and so on. And there are others that exist, like .int for international organizations. And in recent times, the generic top-level domains have been expanded from about 20-something to over 1,000 now, and include even brand-type domains. Like, so if for example, call a bank, .citigroup or something like that. All of these things are possible these days. TCP/IP is the protocol that is used on the internet basically to enable the communications that we see, video and text. We also hear this term OTTs, which is over-the-top services, meaning services that are made to run on the internet, for example. So you have internet access, but what's a useful service that runs on internet? Maybe WhatsApp or one of these types of services which enable you to communicate via the internet, not via the old telephone network. We call those over-the-top services. And finally, voice over IP, VoIP, which is basically meaning over an internet network rather than over the telephone network. You are communicating via voice. So VoIP is another thing that you would hear very, very, very often. You've seen this graphic before in the talk. And basically, you're looking at what are the levels on which this internet governance thing operates. At the bottom is your telecommunications infrastructure. You will not get access to the internet unless you have some sort of telecommunications infrastructure. So this is why it is important that we build out our broadband infrastructure to all parts of our countries so that everyone can get access into the internet. So this is the means, this is the highway on which we ride our information rides in terms of getting to the internet. So somewhere on this telecommunications infrastructure are access points into the internet network, essentially. So that's what we call the internet service providers. So the internet service providers work at a level within the telecommunication infrastructure. They have their own sets of technical standards. They communicate in a certain way. Their end devices typically are computers of a various sort. They might look like a little smartphone in your pocket. They might be a desktop. They might be a big mainframe or whatever. Or in fact, in today's day and age, they might be a little sensor in the Internet of Things. So those operate and communicate according to the internet protocols. I mentioned the TCP/IP just now, or the domain name system, the DNS. And so they work at a particular level in terms of the technical standards. That basically connects you together via the internet protocols and at the internet level. But what do you do when you have that connection at the internet level? You run content. And the content, as you might be able to make out here, you might be doing a search. You might be doing some social media application. You might be connecting via WhatsApp or whatever. So you have content and applications at this level. You might be doing research, whatever. So there is the telecoms infrastructure, there are the internet level standards, and there are the content and applications that take place on the internet. So this is basically what we're talking about. The key network protocols that are highlighted here relate to the internet level, where you'll also find the domain name system, and root servers are part of the domain name system operations. And their function in terms of the domain names, in terms of the DNS, is to convert the names that we know, Facebook's, Google, TAS.SR, and so on, into the internet addresses, the numbers that might be very long and complicated, but that's what the computers need to communicate. So the DNS converts these names into numbers, and root servers are part of the infrastructure that does that conversion at the global level. All right, so all these things are involved in there, and management of all these operations at the telecoms level, at the internet level, at the content level, management of all these things and the impacts of them fall into the realm of internet governance. I think I need to speed up. This is just another diagram that gives you a sense of the internet ecosystem. The basis is the same as the previous diagram. It's just rendered in a different way. This was a diagram developed by the Internet Society, where they have the internet ecosystem and all the various elements of it. You have users, and there are various user organizations associated with that too. We might be governments, businesses, and so on. In another area, you might have people who relate to shared global services and operations, like people who run the root servers, net ISPs, and so on. Open standards development related to the internet. That part of that is in the Internet Society, and there are other standards bodies like the ITU and so on who might operate at the telecoms level. In terms of the naming and addressing, the DNS parts, I mentioned ICANN, but ICANN has delegated to the regional internet registries, and there are things related to the top-level domains and so on under the DNS system. There is also local and regional policy development, and you might find multilateral institutions, governments, governmental, regional organizations like the CTU falling in here. And there are others who are dedicated to capacity building, and various organizations might fall into there. So there's a lot of organizations and personnel working together to keep this internet working. You might hear talk about net neutrality, and basically on the internet, all these services are communicating together, are being communicated together. And the question is, should one get priority or better treatment than another? And that's part of the discussion. Is a principle, a general principle is that all content and applications should basically get equal treatment. You know, they should be rooted and without favoring or blocking any particular products or websites. In recent times in the Caribbean, we've had the network operators, traditional network operators, complaining that the over-the-top services like WhatsApp and so on have been cutting into their communications revenues. And they are typically in a position where they could maybe block those things from happening, but our regulators in the Caribbean have been basically on top of that, I guess, preventing that type of thing from happening. But those are some of the issues that come up in the discussions on internet governance. Cybersecurity, basically we are thinking of protecting the use of electronic data, the communication of electronic data, and the various measures taken to achieve this. Not every internet user has altruistic intent. Encryption is a technique we can use basically to help secure our data when we're sending it over this internet, where maybe it is subject to interception. What we can do is code it in such a way that it cannot be understood by anyone who might be tapping in. So encryption is one of the options that we might have. Cloud computing is a practice whereby we don't run our computer applications locally. Maybe we have a computer system that is off, well, I was going to say off island, but out of the country, that maybe we access and we use. So a good example of a cloud computing application, in fact, is Google Search, WhatsApp, Facebook, all these kinds of things. They basically have servers, as we call them in the IT world, in the internet somewhere, and sometimes is multiple different places in the cloud, as we say, that all the users would connect into. And there is a whole new economy that has grown up around cloud computing, whereby you can buy services in the cloud just as much as you need. And then the concept of convergence. Up till maybe the 1980s, 1990, let's say 1990s, different services had special purpose networks associated with them. So we had the telephone network for voice. If you wanted to do data, in fact, even the internet started basically doing just data communications. But as technology has gone over the last few years, we've had convergence of the technology. So all the services are now capable of being run on a single network, which is basically the IP network. So that has brought in a whole new paradigms, technical, legal, regulatory, and so on. And we'll be talking about some of those over the next few days. So the concept of convergence is the convergence of all services onto a single multi-service network. The internet raises questions of jurisdiction in terms of legal things that it raises: jurisdiction, intellectual property rights. The whole music industry is being transformed by the internet because it's so easy now to move music files back and forth that you don't necessarily have to buy a record or a tape or a CD and stuff anymore. So there are questions. That's an example of intellectual property rights issues that arise in the internet world. A whole new world of crime has arisen, right? So cybercrime is one of the legal issues, and that relates back to jurisdiction, because you don't have to be in a country to commit a crime within a country anymore. And how does one prosecute that in the country where the crime has taken place, if it is someone from outside? So it's a big deal in terms of managing this particular area. And one of the key topics that we'll be covering over the next 3 days is privacy and data protection. This afternoon, we should get a further primer on data protection and what are some of the issues that arise. And hopefully, we'll have a good, lively discussion of it, so that we can see what maybe is the status of things in Suriname and what maybe Suriname might have to do thereafter. Other levels: sociocultural issues, human rights, child safety, multilingualism, cultural diversity, and the rights of the differently abled. All these things are aspects that arise based on the impact of the internet. There are developmental issues. We all talk about the internet economy and the digital economy and stuff like that. So how do we properly take our place in this brave new world that is evolving? We need to enable our people to take part in this digital economy. So we have to set the enabling environment. We have to have the appropriate legal structures. We have to educate, and part of what we're doing here today. And basically, we're looking at creating the legal, organizational, fiscal, informational, political, and cultural circumstances or factors that would help us to move forward. Policy issues that relate internet interconnection, over-the-top services I mentioned, and these are some of them. Even broadcasting is also being transformed through this internet, right? You no longer have to be within the range of a broadcast tower, I can listen to my local Trinidad and Tobago radio station anywhere in the world via the internet. Right? People can reach you. You can advertise over the internet. And what are some of the implications for policy that arise because of things like that? Netflix. You know, does anyone in Suriname regulate what happens on Netflix? I think not. So all these aspects relate to internet governance. This is a diagram that had been developed by the Diplo Foundation probably around 2000, somewhere between 2005 and 2010, which attempted to show all these various aspects, and that we're now building this brave new world, and we're not quite sure how this building is going to turn out. So internet infrastructure, there are economic aspects as well, and it can be a catalyst for innovation and economic growth. Oops, what's happening here? Sorry. Right. In the Caribbean, through the work of the CIGF, over the years, what we've done is develop something we call the Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. Because the internet governance space governs all this range of issues, we took the approach of saying, okay, let's try and focus on what are the most important things for the Caribbean. And we identified at least this doesn't look like the right presentation actually, because I've suddenly gone back to the 13th. Yes, it doesn't. I think I sent the wrong one. But in any case, we have these 6 areas. Broadband connectivity, that's the physical infrastructure. That's the lowest telecoms levels, the broadband infrastructure. The internet technical infrastructure, that's the middle level. And then basically at things related to the higher level are the legal frameworks and enforcement, which would cover things like cybersecurity and so on. Internet content, developing local content, and we felt that was important for us to keep our Caribbean identity on the internet and managing the information on the internet. And we'll be dealing in this forum with data protection in particular. Other areas that we felt were important were public awareness and capacity building and research as well. Okay, so I'm not quite sure how much more I want to do on this. This has been some of the areas that we focus on in Caribbean IG. Cybersecurity, child and data privacy, and so on over the years. This particular forum will be focusing more on the privacy and so on. So I'll stop at that point. I mentioned credits to Diplo, Packet Clearinghouse, CaribNog, ISOC, and the CTU itself. So I think there was some issue in the presentation there, but still, I will stop at this point. I will look at my time, which is 10. And what I'll do, given that I'm like 15 minutes behind, I'll stop at this point, let Albert get into a little more related to the ICANN system, and then we'll take your questions thereafter related to that. So I'll move aside and invite Mr. Albert Daniels, the Senior Manager for Global Stakeholder Engagement for the Caribbean from ICANN,